Hey, Mark.
Hi, Kavya.
Hey, you missed our meeting earlier, so we rescheduled it
What?
because it was really, really important to have you in that meeting.
What? How did I do that?
Because I sent it to Mark at XRSI. Now I'm changing everything to your personal one.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good. Now I know. Hey, Matt.
Hello, Kavya. Hi, Mark.
Hey.
Hello.
How's the Friday feeling, Matt?
Good and bad. I'm happy it's Friday, but has not been a productive day so far. So.
Oh man, what time is it by you? It's 11 over here, so day
1 o'clock.
just kind of
1 o'clock.
started. Oh,
Yeah.
half your day is gone.
I'm past lunch and staring into the void. So.
Oh yeah. So no, we won't tickle your brain too much for now.
I might need the stimulation, so I'll stay quiet unless something perks me up.
Yeah, I'm gonna rely on Mark to be able to do do that. And hey, Janet.
Hey.
Hey.
Sorry. I am driving, so I'm mostly just going to be listening in, if that's okay.
Sounds totally fine. Be safe, all right? And thank you so much for joining and making time for this.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Kavya.
Morning, Valentino, or evening, actually. What time is it by you? Let me tell you what time is it by you, because I always keep track on my Italian team. It's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock, yes.
Yep. Good. So let's wait a couple of more minutes until a couple of more people, if they show up or not. I'm getting better at this, actually, running all these calls and working groups. And then there is the whole I hang out at Clubhouse a lot, so I talk a lot there. And people just keep asking questions, and I keep just like saying things. It really is helpful. Hi, Andres. What time is in
Hello.
Peru? What is the time in Peru?
It's 2 in the afternoon.
Okay, not bad.
Now it's really hot here today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hey, Kavya.
Hey, Dennis.
Hello.
Okay. I'm going to organize my documents in the meantime. Resource list.
Sounds good. For everybody else, I'll be joining for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have to hop out, and we'll hand over total control to Kavya. But I'll try to help as best as I can, Kavya, for the first 30 minutes.
An Excel sheet. Thank you, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll begin. We will, as always, start with the resource list, which is the resources for XRSI Privacy Safety Working Group. So, as always, Friday sessions are supposed to be more like we assemble together and we brainstorm the topic of the week. So just to dive in, quick recap, this resource list contains all the documents I'm going to refer to master Excel sheet in this case, but there are a bunch of other documents. There's code of conduct. If you haven't signed the consent form, please do. Bunch of knowledge base. Please put any reference links there. But I'm going to go all the way down to week 6. Awareness and training. Oh, looks like I didn't copy over the recording link, which is right here. I believe that's the recording here. So let me just copy that in any case. And we did not have 2 recordings for the sprint, just one, just for everyone's knowledge. So there won't be any EU or US because there weren't that many people. We just had the repeat of it. So in week 6, we are discussing 2 functions. One is awareness and training, MN.AT, and the other one is special data type considerations. So let's go one by one. Let's first talk about awareness and training and how that fits together. I'm going to start with the master sheet where awareness and training is mentioned. So I'm going right to the manage part. Why does awareness and training belong in manage focus area is because we are basically managing the risks that may have been obvious or discovered. So various kind of activities, including like encryption or creating awareness around, hey, we should do this, 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 and this, and this, and that, it will be very necessary to ensure that privacy and safety awareness exists. Now, in a normal organization that is not an XR organization, executives are trained to own up to their responsibilities. Now, in an XR organization, a CEO's responsibility and the developer's responsibilities and all of these responsibilities would differ because we are building a different mindset around XR privacy and safety. But just building the mindset isn't sufficient unless it is baked into their organizational structure. So third parties should know what the hell they're supposed to do once this kind of recommendation becomes a part of the company's ecosystem. So this is where the emphasis is that the organization's workforce and third party engage in data processing are provided privacy awareness education and trained to perform those specific tasks. I wonder if the scope is sufficient enough for our purposes. And then I also wonder if we have outlined 4 problem definitions, meaning, okay, well, let's train them on their roles and responsibilities. Senior executives should understand their roles. And then all these things that must happen, there must be some kind of interdisciplinary like talk between various departments that do exchange privacy and safety information. That could be like public relation. One example of it would be like groups that exist in Facebook. It's called Privacy XFN, Exchange Function Group. And finally, any third parties. Thank you, Dennis, for sharing that link. So yeah, do you guys believe that these 4 problem definitions satisfy the overall need for managing risk via creating awareness? Or should we add more? Or should we delete more? Or another question could be, do we have a good understanding of what we are going for here?
I have a question.
Yep.
These are it's mainly designed to use cases, no, where people are using this and have to manage the effects and the things, the related responsibilities.
Exactly.
And you know, I'm very concerned, or my focus is on the design of this. Since the people who design this would go in point 4 in service providers, customers, partners, isn't it? People as service providers, the people who design, for example, an application, they would go in service providers, because that's you know, I want to teach about this to designers of XR. You know, they would go in point 4 service providers.
Question. So what you're highlighting here is if I'm like an indie developer who's putting together an app, what kind of training should I be getting and where is it mentioned amongst these four controls? Is that right, Andres?
Yes, and me as teacher, I form this indie designer. So indie designer is for because we are talking of people who are already working, have already passed through the university and have to learn new rules. But what is coming is people who designs who learn to design XR in the universities and are not in companies, but have to learn that. So they will become service providers, but aren't it now. Since there are two straight another thing to consider: the responsibilities of the people who form the future designers. There's also a responsibility. I have to form my future designers in the awareness and conscious. And I have a responsibility as an educational institution if they don't learn it with me. It's like in communications, they have ethics. And if I don't teach ethics in communication, I'm not a good ethic
Right.
university.
So one thing that when you start to talk about ethics that I believe that we should sort of be cognizant of, that this is more about safety and privacy and not necessarily basing it on ethics. And I specifically take that stance because as soon as you mix ethics into a safety and privacy consideration, you sort of muddy the water and it becomes less data driven and less risk based. It becomes more like a ethos and like this is ideal and this is better. But I'm actually still struggling to understand your question. Dennis, are you hearing like do you have any point of view on this?
We can eliminate the ethics. Ethics was just an example of
got it.
in another place. You part of the they have to form the people in the. It's part of I know what I mean is what we're working now has to be part of the knowledge somebody of somebody being formed in making its error. So this person being formed, the student would go into the category 4 as service provider, I guess. And the one who forms the service provider?
So I wouldn't say so, because what the third party here means is anybody who provides software, hardware, ecosystems development, but mostly like takes the data and then processes the data. So I'm not sure if the students that you're teaching would be considered third parties. In fact, I wouldn't even include the students portion here. That should go into more like a safety awareness. I don't know. I'm not sure if that is in scope here. Because what is in scope here is mostly like people who are building these ecosystems instead of like people who are ingesting or learning. I'm really like struggling to understand like precisely what exactly is the question. So, but I can tell you that students are not third parties. Third parties are people who are sort of taking a data and then just like processing it in some ways.
Let's consider this. The limit of student or not student is very diffuse. I can be working already, being already a workforce and be a designer, and also be studying or start to study. So I don't think we have to separate the student as an extra. Let's just think of the designer
so then
as a service provider.
Okay, I gotcha. So then it would be AT1, Andres, the workforce. So then whatever the workforce is, whether it's a student body, whatever it is informed and trained as to what their roles and responsibilities are, how they impact privacy. And then in this case, I would like to petition that we include privacy and safety, how they impact individual privacy and safety. So that's where you would put them.
Okay, fine. Then that's clear from.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for wrestling through that, Kavya. And I was having a kind of a similar problem because I thought that we were almost getting stuck on, I don't know if syntax is the right word there, definition. But I think you're totally right, Kavya, in that it's workforce. That's workforce.
Yeah, that's workforce. But I really appreciate Andres for, especially because I know you're always like, oh, that's a dumb question. I asked stupid question. That is not the case. You really
No,
just
it's
understand.
the-
You just really helped us dive into like clear scope of things. So please, I encourage your participation. One
Is that
thing,
something that we
yeah.
need to define in a document? Like, is that a kind of question that the framework itself needs to identify? Like, students can, the workforce can include students in a program, right? Should we be providing that level of clarity so that if people working at a university go, oh well, this isn't workforce, so we don't fit in this section. Do we just need to kind of put a note somewhere in the framework that says, hey, when we say workforce, that can include, professionals as well as, students working on an application?
Yep. So especially in the higher ed realm, that would be a valid call out. So what constitute?
Sorry, because usually when we talk about XR in education, we're talking about using XR to educate somebody with XR. But another thing is to use, I think, educate somebody in XR, in designing XR. And I think it's really important because these people are going to make this stuff in the future. And these people have to be conscious and are also willing to learn. But if we don't teach them, we will have the same problems like we have now.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point.
Very cool. So I think we should think about it and sort of define this good, like what does workforce mean, at least in the realm of higher ed. Okay. One more thing, as we are on the topic, I am going to pull up some documentation. I should have it here.
Hey, Kavya, before you jump too far,
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead.
going back to the list of items, I think you asked about the whether that covered everything. The two things that occur to me that's pretty common, particularly if you include safety in it, then one option is contracts. You can use contracts with service providers, to actually legally bind the service provider to consider that. And then the second thing to think about is that you're looking for objective evidence. You're looking for objective evidence that you're doing it internally, as well as your suppliers are doing it, and so that's typically done in the form of an audit. So auditing is, and I know you asked before about where you all could fit in and that sort of thing, and so like an audit is a typical way, that one would go about and look at that. And then, and I think the other day when we were talking too, I mentioned that from a safety standpoint, depending on the level of risk that an organization may need to demonstrate the effectiveness of their training. So it's great that you're doing training, but it's just like, there's a term for it. I can't think of what it is right at the moment, but where you get like these formal documents that you're required to DocuSign and stuff. Yeah, I read this, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So, hey, it's great that you read it. Did you understand it? And how do you know that you understood it? So you can go beyond, just that documentation aspect, where people are required to attest that they've read a document and that they're aware of it. You can supplement that with actual formal testing of some sort, and there's, by the way, there's a lot of different methods. I think the other day you were talking about learning management systems or
Mhm.
LMSs.
Mhm.
That was one of the uh, uh, service lines that I'm familiar with, and we actually had a group that's all they did. They wrote software that basically tracks training and that sort of thing. And training can be assessed in a lot of different ways. Training can be assessed by a formal examination, typical like you're going to school or whatever, and you have to take an exam to demonstrate that you know it. But it could also be, depending on how it is, it could be like a mentor type program. Like if if you think about a surgeon performing, surgery, it's not, you can't take an exam for that. So you're going to need somebody that's a true expert on the subject, that's going to have to basically review your work and, say that, yeah, this person is competent to perform this, so there's, I could go on and on about that
Mhm.
stuff,
Yeah.
but those are all possible ways to do those sorts of things.
Yeah. From everything that you said, Mark, one thing that I wanted to point out is that the legal contract in SLA, it is PRDS4.
Okay.
So it is not documented in the context of mitigating risk using training, but it
Mhm.
is still under prevention of harm,
Mhm.
availability, capacity. Perhaps when we come to it, we can expand the scope of this in terms
Mhm.
of like what should be in the legal contracts and SLAs,
Right.
perhaps in the detailed. It's not just about availability, capacity. We could even awareness of things and the efficacy of that awareness that exists. We could potentially go there,
Yeah.
but a really good call out.
Yeah, there's lots of other things that you can do to put some teeth in that. Also with the contract is that, if you say that, a third party provider is going to be subject to audit, and that's pretty common, that organizations that are outsourcing certain critical activities, they'll actually go and audit a firm, and you can even do kind of more serious things like unannounced audits where you just show up on a given day and say, okay, we're doing an audit today, and they can be totally unprepared. But that's actually what the FDA can do. For any medical device manufacturer, if you're making a medical device product and it's registered with the FDA, they can at any time show up on your doorstep and say, we're doing an audit today. And you have no choice. You got to do it. The same thing is true in Europe, with the notified and everything. So.
I'm just kind of documenting. Surgery ensuring safety and privacy. Okay, so let me park that there because we don't want to lose this thought for when we visit this particular control. And let's get back to what we were discussing here, the potential missing aspect from this. So one definitely is the effectiveness of training. So, but one potential control besides these four could be organizations and individual, or sorry, organizations must establish um, ways to validate efficacy of the training that all the workforce understands. Like they need to provide proof of some sort or ensure that this training is being given. But then I think about how is this different than this? The workforce is informed and trained on the sole responsibility, how they impact individual privacy, or how is it different than this? Like senior executives understand their role. Um, so what I'm saying is perhaps when we document the context of this particular control, we could potentially include efficacy and effectiveness criterias within that, or should we put together additional control that, yeah, you give training, but then the additional control is you must give proof. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I think, again, it's going to be risk based. It's going to be depending on, what it is, because you don't want to do it carte blanche, because it gets to be overkill.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to do it on a risk basis. If it's extremely high risk, then it may be appropriate. But I would be um, I would recommend that you don't dictate anything specific
Uh-huh.
on
Yeah.
how it's done, but rather, you lay it out that it needs to be demonstrated, and then, the organization can determine, the best method to perform that demonstration. Because, like, if you're dealing with a Fortune 100 company, that's got to train 5,000 people, as opposed to a startup, that's working out of a garage and they've got, 4 employees total. The methodology can and likely would be totally different for how you would go about and do that. So it should be, I think, flexible. But the point is that, if there is something that's of particularly high risk, then it's appropriate to demonstrate the effectiveness of the training. So for, going back to the surgery example, do you, how comfortable would you be, walking in and having surgery performed on yourself,
Mm-hmm.
or your child, or your significant other, and, if that person hadn't gone through some rigorous program to demonstrate that they have the skills necessary to perform, that essentially, life altering event,
Mm-hmm.
so those, so that's a sort of thing.
Yeah. So then again, I'm gonna ask you, does it make sense to add additional control that says we must validate effectiveness of the training and create like some kind of risk-based, role-based training? Or should we write that within the context of MN.AT?
Yeah, there's
Because
actually
it must exist, but then how
yeah,
strongly do you think that we should emphasize it in the framework?
yeah. Again, I think, it can just be a statement. I think it's just uh, I'm drawing from some other standards that
Uh-huh.
that I'm aware of that uh, are legally required for medical device manufacturers, from a safety standpoint.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to think if there is a similar requirement within the FDA's quality system regulation, because that's a public document and,
Mm-hmm.
it's subject to copyright and everything. But you know, for example, I know within ISO 1345 for quality management systems,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I can point to chapter and verse, where that's actually called out. But again, that's a copyrighted document, and I'm trying to think. There's a lot of things that are similar within the FDA's quality system regulation, and if you want to do I can pull it up too. But
Mark, could we equate that to some kind of a quality check, or is that like just more like, wherever
yeah,
risk-based training?
well, it actually there's some subtleties. Going back to that earlier comment that she had, like what's the difference between this management thing and this awareness thing?
Yep.
Those are specific. They are different,
Mm-hmm.
and they are specific things. But again, I'm just
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
little bit you know I'm going from memory here, and I need to actually
Yeah.
kind of go back to some of those and actually look up the clauses, and
Yeah.
I can provide further clarification.
Perfect.
But they are definitely different.
Yeah.
Um,
I know that Dennis has got to jump. Just one second, Mark. I think that what we're doing is perfect. So let's document and park our thoughts, and then you
mhm.
can like offline revisit it and add the elaborate context. And at least I would like to petition that validating the effectiveness of these type of training could potentially and should potentially be a separate control, especially, we're talking about surgeons, especially in medical
Mhm.
context. We're talking about people who would never pay attention to privacy and safety, and telling them, hey, all the teachers, now you're dealing with all this data. I know people are going to come around, students will come and scan the classroom, so like have some awareness of this thing. So like validating that they actually understand would be good. Hey, Dennis, do you have any last words? And I know you got to drop off.
No, I thought that, I mean, I don't want to change the momentum. I thought that that was a really good conversation happening there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yep. So Mark,
Yep,
we could
just wanted to-
vote on it, or what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to throw out one other thing,
Mhm.
because he used the word validate, and I would be careful. If you look up the definitions, that the FDA uses between verify and validate, they're two different things.
Mm.
And I would be very cautious about use of those validating in particular, because
Mhm.
validation basically means that you're going to evaluate something, or do things that are going to effectively 100% guarantee that this is what's going to happen.
I see.
So verification is probably a better choice of words
Mm.
than
Gotcha.
validation, because they have two different meanings. And validation is, like I say, it's used when you're you've got a process that you need to ensure that's essentially going to be 100% effective in all cases, and that you're not going to have any problems, and that's very difficult to do. It's not that it can't be done. I mean, there's a whole series of things around validation, but it has a very specific meaning. So I would just be very cautious of that term, and that's just something to be aware of.
So to kind of tie these two things together, because I wanted to build on something Kavya just said, but you bring up a really good point, Mark. And this is by far not my area of expertise, but I was thinking having a separate control would leave the door open for something like a certification or something else, some program piece, which could be purely a business thing, or a protection against outside groups, claiming that they have expertise in this area. So maybe a better use of the word is either certification or endorsement. And sort of like the good housekeeping seal. I know we talked about this briefly, Kavya, but I think having that separate control would make it so that you kind of define, here are the things that you need to do to be in compliance, air quotes, and then there's other control for actual certification or endorsement, or something that says XRSI believes that this entity has done the minimum or whatever for this particular thing. And I think that's critically important, obviously in healthcare, but I think just going forward in general, XR technology, as more and more sensors are being brought in and more data is collected, you need to know that the people are using it correctly and following the framework and so on and so forth. So I would second the idea of having another control.
Yeah, and I would agreed, and I just it's how we would want to phrase it, because as I mentioned, I think it's appropriate that it would be risk-based, because you're not going to do it for everything. You can't do it for everything. But in those critical cases, where it's just again, going back to the surgeon example, you want to you have an extremely high level of confidence, that the person's going to be able to execute and do so successfully. And so, from a risk basis, therefore, you want to have you want to have some documented level of proof, that this person does indeed have, does understand that, and can actually apply the concepts, as the case may be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you hit on that same thing again, which is there's certain risk categories, and I don't know where that's defined in the framework, but something like the ISO standard, right? Like you'd expect it for healthcare or critical manufacturing if you're using this technology and you're working around, dangerous equipment or doing something that's potentially dangerous to the end user. So having that kind of thing in there saying that we are in compliance with, or we are certified in whatever. So I think that defining mechanism, that there will be groups that need to be in compliance with this and others that should be aware of it, and then others that it doesn't really matter. An AR phone game is going to be completely different than a surgeon working on me.
Yeah, because I think the another phrase or term that comes up is objective evidence. Because that's like, because I went through this, when risk management, first came out for medical device, and I was the program manager, within my organization, responsible for, implementing assessment processes for medical device manufacturers of risk management, and ensuring that globally, across all of our offices around the world, that we were implementing this correctly. And so, I personally, the approach that I took was to do a Six Sigma, project. So, so what I did is, basically, you went out or what I did is, I wrote up a quiz, and then I solicited it or sent it around to all of our staff, and they took it, and the results were about what I expected, because the risk management, the way the standard is written, it's written kind of at an abstract level, and so it was open to some pretty wide interpretations, and so not surprisingly, you got some pretty some answers that were not what you would hope for.
Yeah.
And so what I did then is based on those areas that I saw that seemed to create the most confusion, I wrote a training program, and I basically I flew around the globe, and I flew to all of our offices, and I trained all our people. And then I waited 3 months after completing, my navigation of the globe and doing all my training and everything. And I waited 3 months, and I sent out a new survey. And and it was classic Six Sigma, because it's just the repeatability and reproducibility, just everything was just just way improved. And I did the 3 months, to in line with the human factors to do allow for knowledge decay, because if you take an exam, immediately after the training, everything's going to be fresh in your mind. But if you wait 3 months and you wait for knowledge decay, things get a little bit sketchier, so for me, so, and I had that data. So when you look for objective evidence, that was, I could point to hard data, say, okay, here's before, here's after. And it was it was kind of neat how it worked out.
Yeah, and I think that validates that verifying the efficacy of the training sort of provided. We could rephrase the whole thing. It is really important. It's definitely important in higher ed. It's definitely important in medical XR. So I believe potentially we could drill down into it. So Mark, please feel free to add those gems that you visited in your lifetime, and let's
I
build
like telling
upon them.
stories,
Yeah.
if you haven't figured that out already.
So with that, I know Deborah.
I have a quick question.
Yes, please go ahead, Jenna.
Yeah, so where would someone on a review board or IRBs or anyone who's like not directly involved in creating XR but is part of an entity, like let's say you have a research program, so if you're considering higher ed, you whatever they propose reviewed by an IRB board. But today what happens is IRB boards don't really know what's possible with emerging tech. So
absolutely. That is a larger sort of a, once you, okay, I'm going to share with you something that's an internal document because it's right in front of me. This is the recommendations we did plan to send to Biden-Harris administration. So this is a recommendation, the number 3, based on the framework that we're developing. But this type of a framework review board, we cannot include in the framework unless we have the possibility, and that has to be at the federal level. Otherwise, we're just, again, like AI ethics silos. Okay, there is a bipartisan review board that doesn't serve half of the globe, doesn't serve India, so this is like, it has to start from either EU Commission or the federal US level, and then we can talk about, okay, IRB has to come in and validate XYZ, da 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 da. So this is a next step, what you're referring to, and it's a good thinking, and we've been thinking along the lines, but we are not going to consider that during the development of just the problem definition and how to solve them. IRB comes into picture when you have to enforce it, or you have to adopt it. So let's go with like, let's figure out what the problem definition is. Let's figure out how to solve this problem. And then once we have, that's when IRBs kind of things. And there is definitely all these parallel efforts that are going on, perhaps hidden from this group, but be rest assured that is very good thinking and it must be done, just not in the context of this framework right here.
I know the way I was thinking about it was just if you do have trainings, there especially if there's like a base level of some sort of awareness training, then that even in this framework should extend beyond just the small group. So if you think of how universities work, IRBs, yeah, maybe a separate case, but I think this might come under, I wasn't looking at the screen because I was driving before this, but when you talked about defining the workforce,
okay,
is one option where like they are directly working on it, but the way academic projects are set up, you have multiple levels of people working on it. So I think it might be good to call out that in the workforce, like either who all come under it, but I feel like once you start going into the academic setting, you're now including practically everyone in there. So it might be good to call out like either different levels of training and then just the base that all the PIs or anyone on the review board needs to have, even if that means like providing a document that they can look at, because it can work both ways. So what we do today is when we submit an IRB like request or proposal, sometimes we include documents of like standards. Just for context, like again, my research is XR, which means there are very few people on the board who actually understand it in terms of what we are collecting and what you can do with it. And so that's something our lab does, but that's not necessarily what everyone does or even wants to do. So it might be nice to call that out in terms of just having that information, just sort of like a base understanding of it.
Yep. So basically, you know, the whatever potential stakeholders, and we called it workforce, but like whatever potential stakeholders are involved, they must have some sense of understanding of what's up. Because a lot of the times people are diving in, they're even on judging panels for an entire cohort, but they don't ever look at the organization through the filter of privacy and safety. And more we emphasize this will change the narrative, and this will change the emphasis of these companies. It's like, oh, everybody's evaluating based on like how much money can you make. Well, I'd like to petition for, you know, privacy and safety. I actually petitioned for this cohort or whatever VC funders, WXR. It's run by almost all white women except for one black woman, and that has just been recently brought in. And in one of their meetings, I petitioned that hey, you guys should consider privacy safety stuff. This was like 2 years ago, and they can all sit around the whatever thing table and talk about it, but there is no concrete like, hey, our research group would love to know what safety privacy stuff we should be thinking about when we bring these new organizations or like the group of women to put XR research together or give them money to do so. So it's a really good idea. It could influence those VC type people as well, and it would definitely influence this research group things as well. So I'm totally writing this down in terms of
I mean, I wasn't pretty sure if it fits in here, but generally once you start moving out of industry, things start becoming a lot less structured. And in academia, most PIs rely on grad students to do diligent work, but you can only do diligent work if everyone around has resources for it.
Got it, Janet. I think somebody's trying to get a word in. Who is that?
Andres.
Okay. Sorry, Janet. Are you
okay.
Are you good with the what I document? Okay, perfect.
I don't have a solution. I just wanted to.
It's we're here for problems. That's wonderful. We'll find solutions. Let's look for problems first. Go ahead, Andres.
Yeah, when Mark was talking, I agreed. I think also it's really important, relevant, not only is a checkbox at the end, but really seeing if people have understood what to read. And as I wrote in the chat, I think certification, maybe it's too much work for XRSI to make the certifications of designer whole for certification, but maybe XRSI can recommend criteria
Yep.
for certifications, and I believe these certifications would be really relevant in diverse contexts. Also, as Janet said, um, in the context of one thing is when you're teaching, but another thing is when you're researching, and the research groups, both in academia as outside of academia, could have should have someone inside of them certified with this yeah, with the thing we are working in,
Yep.
with the
Yep.
safety rules. And what I was writing there in the chat was like maybe, I don't know if in this framework 1.1, maybe later, but maybe there can be a corpus of criteria
Gotcha.
in our, my English is
No,
falling down.
Andres, I'm reading your mind, but there is a parallel effort going on to come together of what that certification could be. And when we will take in scope the verifying the efficacy of the training provided when that certification and rating comes together. So yeah, I got you. I hope I'm doing justice to wrapping up your thoughts. Is that because I read your comments too?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was searching for informed
Yeah, no, there is a
language
parallel
stuff.
effort, which we can't go into too details of it, but it's a very valid way to pursue these problems. And hopefully we'll come up with certification or ratings, and people would try to, start to adopt those things. But that's like somewhat in the future, but there is a parallel effort pursuing that. So we have like 14 minutes left. I believe if we've kind of synthesized this, there is another topic that we're here to discuss today, which is the special data type consideration. A couple of things that I want to say about that special data type consideration. Let me see, where is that? So it's still in the managed piece. We skipped the data processing aspect here, awareness and training, and then we went straight to special data type considerations. Let me go to the resource list. Week 6, we're discussing special data type considerations. And within these special data type consideration, why is it so important? It's probably one of the most important thing to discuss is because we are going beyond the PII, personal identifiable information, PHI, personal health information. We are diving into gaze, pose, body movement, thought patterns. So back in 2019, XRSI had started a XR data classification effort, which did not really materialize because people don't really want to submit their data. So unless you have data, it's hard to define schemas. It's hard to come up with what is considered good, bad, whatever inferences. So inferences that can be made. So this is the thing that we established using XRSI privacy framework, the special data type consideration inferences. So I don't know if you guys were present during the kickoff meeting, but there is it doesn't have the thing. It doesn't have the picture of the special data type consideration. I was looking for that. But anyhow, I believe it's really, really important to talk about it. First, hey, beyond just PII and PHI, classify whether what's considered sensitive, risky, and then include these type of biometrically inferred data. Are you processing and sharing inferred data? When you're processing, sharing inferred data, are you considering these risks to underrepresented population, vulnerable populations? So an example of it would be, if you are, earlier I said, if you're sharing some kind of an inference with an insurance provider, that insurance providers could potentially deny coverage. So health related information. So this could really put a lot of burden on big organization, and as it should, because they make a lot of money doing this thing. And right now there are no protections whatsoever, literally zero. They could sell your data to anybody, anytime, and 5 years later, we don't know why we are being denied coverage. Oh, because they know exactly when you're going to have a heart attack because you spent about 5 hours in VR on a daily basis, and Facebook knew it, and yet still they handed the data over to Delta or Blue Cross Blue Shield. And that is a very plausible scenario. And that's why we're like, you know what? It's time that we try to synthesize this. There is a particular document that is from a project that was launched in June 2020. I'm pulling this document up on my screen. Can you guys still see it? Okay, so if you go down to this document,
we can see it.
Perfect. If you go down to this document, there are these bit fields and nodes. So there is the notion of schema right before right here. So, you know, some kind of a data structure. And that was our hope that we could come up with something like this. So I believe within this special data type consideration, we should actually document all these inferences or like beyond PII type fields. And we should include PII and stuff, because what would happen is sometimes you could combine those two things and that could be putting people at risk. So anytime you combine a harmless information with PII, you must carefully consider, special consideration must be made. Or anytime you combine harmless PII type stuff with like inferences that could put people at risk. So I'm not sure how we would tackle this, but I firmly believe that more and more granular we get in this, better it would be for the industry to slice and dice their own data types. Any thoughts, guys?
Is the thinking to create a file, like a separate file type that collects the stuff that could be, anybody could find, you know, and you could prove whether or not BID is being captured?
Right. So, you know, Matt, what I'm thinking is like, how is one day FDA going to turn the HIPAA regulation into like, hey, we need to include inferences, we need to include all these gaze, pose, gait, and all this data, if they just don't have the pathway to it. And the only pathway that's going to be is we need to tell companies to understand what's going on within their ecosystem, document it, and when the regulatory time comes, it's already kind of like a mechanism that's inbuilt, and then you can easily regulate that and build that. So we need to shift the narrative of industries until the real regulation comes in the picture, that this is one way to mitigate the risk by using these inferences criteria, by documenting what all are you sharing with people, because they're like, oh, well, you know, we don't share any PII. And when I listen to that from XR organization, it's beyond laughable. It's like, you know what all you're sharing and you're fully aware of it. Ask any of the data visualization companies like Bad VR, Cognitive 3D, and actually those people, I'm going to bring them into this sort of a discussion and get from them more identifiers that they are actually already aware of is going on in terms of like gaze and that kind of stuff. What could happen, and please help me with this, is that some devices may have a particular way to call that identifier. Other devices may call it something else. So some may call it anchor, some may call it something else. And then we would have to come in and sort of standardize that notion and promote that. So I hope I'm making sense, but this is just an example of leveraging these type of identifiers. More and more examples would be so welcome.
Yeah, Kavya, and I think we talked about this the other day, because I think the other piece that is the whole artificial intelligence and the ability of an AI device to actually combine parameters that may be available for an individual in ways that we can't even anticipate at this point. But I think we have to acknowledge the use of AI to combine those parameters in ways that'll, you know, basically be able to identify individuals, you know, with virtual certainty.
Absolutely. Very, very good point. So when you say that, Mark, I just want to point out to this group that we have a dedicated project going on, which is, it's like a sub-functions subgroup of exactly what we're working on. But this is very much directed to artificial intelligence. So this is called MK.AI. This group is run by Richard Fletcher, and most of these people are like AI experts or researcher. So what does that mean, actually? I'm going to pull up the document that MKAI. Here we go. So they basically, asked me like, hey, are we thinking along the right lines? Like, are these good the kind of things that we're thinking about? What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. Anyone on the internet? Okay, well, that's okay. This document is not much longer in use, so I'm going to include that reference. This, and there was another document, right? We had the binding taxonomy notes. So I'm going to include that here. Yeah, because they have sort of organized this in my email, Richard. I can't find that now, master working copy. I'm not sure, but Richard had sent an updated document. It's not here right now, or maybe it is. No, 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 no. But at some point, I will add the input they're providing, which is very much specific to Mark, what you said, the AI context. And they are very much targetedly looking into those those things, which includes and should include inferences. Oh, no, maybe biometric. Nope. There is definitely the mitigating biases, risk for sense. Oh yeah, there is this gaze data. Perhaps I should recommend to them to include not just gaze risk, but like pose, whatever else kind of data, not just gaze, but like biometric inferred data. Yep, I am going to make that recommendation. Mark, is that like, are you happy with that direction? Like the AI folks really just zeroing in on that aspect of data consideration?
Well, I mean, it's certainly, one of those things that we know, and I'm sure, is used today to be able to identify individuals uniquely.
Exactly.
So we have to consider that, and then, the point is that once you've identified that individual, then what do you do with that information? And that's where you run into trouble potentially.
Exactly. So, I mean, once you establish those biometric inferred data, then organization must consider by default stuff. And then by default stuff, while collecting, processing, and storing, that is probably what is like, hey, what are you doing with this data by default? And then you definitely will have exceptions, but at least the by default is not like hand it over to all the Silicon Valley organization and create a new Cambridge Analytica, which is going to be way worse than what we ever saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, these milestones help me establish like how bad stuff is going to get. Deborah, okay, thank you so much for joining. And Andreas, yeah, dozens, yeah, please, start curating these identifiers in the document is what I would say. So I think we have 3 minutes left. Are there any questions corresponding to special data type consideration, or do we all understand what is the ask here? Very cool. And if you have a specific, like if you have come across schemas or special types of data, how is gaze measured? How is gait measured? Then you should certainly help us curate that research, because we're going to be looking at it very, very closely to propose how do we then fix this or mitigate the risk of large plethora of information just handing in wrong hands that will impact humans negatively. So I think with that, I would like to say that let's close on that note, and let's go back and consider the what was the one, special data type consideration, and then training and awareness for XR, and continue to add your research and ask questions in the Signal chat if you haven't joined the Signal group yet. But yeah, have a wonderful weekend.
All right. You too.
too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.